In today's video, I want to talk about analyzing how long somebody has listened to your podcast. It's a top question that we get here at Castos is, can I see how long somebody has listened to a particular podcast episode? And I'll point you in the direction of where you can get that data and explain to you why we don't track that as a whole here at Castos, and probably even at your podcast host if your podcast host is using the RSS feed to broadcast your podcast to the world, and if you're giving your listeners the ability to listen to it on any app. It's the open model, the open publishing model that the RSS affords us. Let's dive into this fake Whiteboard Wednesday because I'm doing it on an iPad. So how long have they listened to our episodes? So as I was alluding to, we power our podcasts here by the almighty RSS feed. The RSS feed is this 20-plus-year-old technology that allows us to freely distribute our content over, let's say, and our viewers and readers and listeners to subscribe to using their favorite apps, their favorite podcasting apps, their favorite, blog reading apps, Feedly, for example. Google was once dominant in this space with Google Reader and being able to see all of a content that you subscribe to on a website. So the RSS feed is very important to us. And what the RSS feed does is it allows us to broadcast our podcast information to places like Apple, of course, that's a terrible E, Google, and Spotify. Now, these are just the top three, but the RSS feed acts as that business card or that highway of transferring information. Apple says, hey, we want to take a look at your podcast episodes, your description, your cover art. Where can we get that? Apple says, oh, let me go look over this RSS feed and communicate back here, and then pull up your podcast information from, let's say, Castos. So we can get that information sent from Castos over the RSS feed, and then that goes to Apple, Google, and Spotify. And the issue that we have here is the MP3 file is just handed out at will. Your podcast episodes, which are generally your MP3 file, get broadcasted to the world in many different places. So people can download it and play it on, let's say, your website, www. They can get it in, let's say, Overcast, which is a very popular Apple podcast app. They can listen to it on Spotify or stream it on Spotify, as it's known. In all of these places, your MP3 file is being sent to for people to consume. Again, largely due to the power of this 20-year-old technology called RSS. The challenge here is there's no way that Castos can measure how long somebody has listened to your MP3 because there's nothing reporting back to Castos. So the challenge here is that none of these apps or distribution points are reporting back to Castos and saying, hey, here's how long this person listened to this episode. In order to do something like that, we would have to do what famously Spotify does, which is have their own app that you listen to podcasts in, podcasts that you can distribute from Castos into Spotify, or premium shows that are only available in Spotify. You are playing it and listening to it or streaming it in the Spotify environment. And because it's done within the Spotify app is able to sort of wrap a statistic, if you will, or encode the MP3 and say, oh, as this MP3 is playing, we know what's happening with the user. We know they're listening to it. And that gets all reported back to Spotify, but it doesn't get reported back to Castos. Now, of course, it's their company, it's their app. This is what they can do. There could be this coalition of places that, like Spotify and like Apple, where they do report that data back to us. That would be fantastic, but they don't. And that's part of their edge. So Apple also does the same thing that Spotify does as somebody's listening to it. There's this little ticker going on and saying, oh, you're playing the episode. We're counting how many seconds is happening. And Apple reports that into the Podcast Connect account. So when you're looking for where you can get this information from, you can get it from Apple. My handwriting is terrible. You can get it from Apple and Spotify if you log into your accounts at Apple and Spotify. You can get this data in your graph or in their graphs that tell you how long somebody has listened to an episode. So Apple and Spotify track this because it's in their app. And this time is only tracked. Let's say your average episode is listened to 4 minutes and 12 seconds, let's say. It's only going to track that data when somebody's listening to it in the default Apple podcast app and let's say the Spotify app. And I believe Google does this as well in the Google Podcast app. So you can get this data, but all of the data that goes out over the RSS feed, I thought I was changing colors there. All of the data that goes out on the RSS feed, that data is not tracked. There's no way for us to wrap that MP3 file and know what's happening with other podcast apps to say, oh, we know how many seconds somebody has listened to this episode for. Nobody's reporting that back to Castos. We have no way to track it. Now, even places, there are some podcast hosting companies that say, well, we can track it in the web player, let's say. They have a web player on their site, and you have your podcast cover art. Maybe you have the play button, and you have the time or whatever right there. They say, well, if you're hitting play right here, we can track this on your website. If you have the player on the website. First, just like Apple and Spotify, it's only going to happen in this contained environment on your website. It's only happening, the tracking, which is still just an estimation when it's played on a website, So it's still in that silo. How many people actually listen to your podcast on your website? If you're a Castos customer, you check your analytics. You see how many people are listening to it in a browser versus how many people are listening to it in a mobile app. And then you make your determination there. So to sort of wrap things up here, sure, it would be nice to know how long somebody has listened to an episode. Is it the most important stat? I would say probably not. Where can you get that stat now? You can get it from Apple, Spotify, and Google, and then compare that to your Castos analytics. So you can reverse engineer and log into your existing Apple and Spotify accounts, look at how long somebody's listened to an episode in those apps, and give yourself a pretty confident estimate of how long people might be listening to your episodes on other RSS-driven podcast apps. Do we really want this? If we did, what we'd be saying is we'd be committing most of our audience to an individual app. So if you really always wanted to know how long your entire audience is listening to your podcast, you would vote to say, only listen to my podcast in Apple podcast apps. You could actually say that as a creator. There's no rules there. You could promote the heck out of Apple and Spotify if you want those kind of apps. But what you're also saying is, well, I'm also voting for more of a closed ecosystem with that. RSS means that anyone can listen to it anywhere. That's the beauty of it. And you'll never get everyone on Apple and Spotify because they're all on different platforms. Google, Apple, Spotify. People want choice. They want freedom. That's why RSS is still so powerful in this space. So that is an explanation, a long explanation, I admit, of why we don't track time listened, how we technically can't because of just the mechanism that we deliver podcasts in the open RSS fashion. But to reassure you that, as a Castos customer, you can get that information from Apple and Spotify. It won't be the entire pie chart of your audience, but it lends to a great estimate of how long your other listeners might be listening to an episode. What do you think about my drawing? This is the first time I've done this. I have terrible handwriting, admittedly, but it's a lot easier than setting up all of the gear to the whiteboard behind me. Thumbs up if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want more. If that explanation didn't make sense or you do have questions, further questions, leave them in the comments below. Reach out to us, hello@castos.com. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.